Good morning, everybody. It's day 3 of IBC 2024 from RAI Amsterdam in Amsterdam. And we have an exciting lineup today. It's a third day. It's been amazing past 2 days. And we have Andi Wenzel, who's a freelance visual effect artist who has been in the field for a while now, who's been doing some amazing stuff. And he will be talking about his workflow, sharing and taking us through a lot of things. And I'll let Andi take ahead from here. Do not forget to scan the QR codes when they come up on the screen. One QR code is for the assets. Andi has shared his assets as well, so you can download them and play around with what he's showing you today. We also have the QR code for a chance of winning Maxon 1 license, so please scan that as well. And please be with us. We're going to have some amazing artists today. Let's kick it off with Andi. Take it ahead. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. So, good morning, everyone here at IBC 2024 in Amsterdam, and also everyone on the live stream. Welcome to my presentation about creating cinematic landscapes in Cinema 4D and Redshift. So, before we start, I just want to introduce myself real quick. My name is Andi Wenzel. I'm a freelance visual effects artist since around 2010. And I would call myself a 3D generalist and compositing artist. As you can see here, there's quite some variation in my work. And on some of these projects, I only did 3D. On others, I only did compositing. But I tend to like the ones the most where I can do both. So although I like being a generalist, I still have a focus on lighting and shading. So maybe some of you remember the Maxon release film from a few years back called Latista. On this one, I did the lighting and compositing. And we made this project as a team at our shared office space called Büro Feuerwache in Mainz in Germany. And there we have a bunch of creative freelancers sitting there. For example, Can Erduman, who is presenting here as well, and Alex Boats. With both of them, I created the Latista short film. And the advantage of the office is that we are able to kind of act like a studio, and we come together as a team to tackle bigger projects together. So why did I choose landscape creation as a topic for this presentation? So during the last few years, I made several projects where I had to build various landscapes. And I think large-scale scenes like that can be quite overwhelming. So at least that was the case for me. And although also they're hard to do on a limited time and budget. And let's be honest, that's almost every time the case when you do client work. So during these projects, I learned some tips and tricks, I think, that I would like to share with you. And everything here that I want to show you is around how to build the environments in an efficient way and in the amount of time that you get. And it's about saving time and resources. So here are some of the projects where it all kind of started for me. I had the opportunity in 2019 to do some showcase renders for the exterior 3D scanned assets, great assets by the way, that are now included in the Cinema 4D content browser. I think it's only a few days ago where they announced that, so have a look at those. And these first projects I did were they're focused more on the details and were close-up shots. But soon I had projects where I had to build wider landscapes, bigger scenes. Here it's pretty simple still, so just the mountains in the background. Here on this project for our sponsor, I had to build kind of the mountain landscape and a forest scene that you see in a minute. This project was super fun. Right, then shortly after, there were following kind of jobs where I had to build more detailed landscapes with more vegetation, more details in them. And the aim always was to kind of have a photoreal result in the end. And we all know that's in 3D, that's not a walk in the park. So on this particular project, for example, it was kind of a one-man show, except some additional simulations and animations. I did it all by myself, the 3D and compositing part. And so I had to come up with an efficient way to do it in the amount of time that I had. So to guide you through my workflow step by step, I created this kind of demo scene just for this presentation today. And yeah, I want to show you I want to show you different ways how to tackle the problems to do a project like this in a reasonable amount of time. So before we dive into Cinema 4D, I want to talk about, I want to start how every project should start. It's collecting references. So I try to find important characteristics of landscapes, so the things that make a landscape believable and real. So the first thing that comes to mind is scale. And I think it's an issue in 3D often to get the scale right, to get it feel right. So what can help with that is to use objects that you know pretty well. So like the houses in here, we all know how big a house is, so our brain tells us what the scale is here. And another thing that can help is to repeat the same object on different distance levels. So like the trees in here, we have trees in the foreground, in the middle ground, in the background, and this helps us to get a sense of the right scale of the scene. Another important thing is about depth and atmosphere. I think almost every landscape image has these atmospheric effects. It's called aerial perspective or atmospheric perspective, and it's the effect that happens that the colors in the far back get washed out and mostly bluish. And I think it's always great to think about your light and mood that you want to get in the end. So again, study a lot of photography images to get it right in the end. Look at the colors, the saturation, the brightness, the contrast, things like that. And also we often see these kind of stacked layers in landscape images when it comes to mountains, for example. And it's the atmospheric effect that we're seeing here, but it's good to keep in mind that these layers can help you with your compositions in your landscape renders. And a bit more of a kind of scientific point is to kind of think about the setting where your scene is set at. Think about the area and the climate and what vegetation you will find there, what plants are growing there. And with habitat rules, what I mean by that is things like the tree line. When you look at images of the Alpine mountains, for example, you see that at some point the trees stop growing at a high altitude. So yeah, keep that in mind and use that for your scenes. And when we look at all of these examples, I think one thing I realized is that it's not so much about single elements. And so don't waste your time on like a photoreal bark texture for this one particular tree that's sitting somewhere in your scene. When you're doing these large-scale scenes, it's more about the whole picture and the overall thing. And I think the realism doesn't come from this one texture. It comes from the right compilation and composition of all your elements and combined with a realistic lighting and atmosphere in the end. So be smart about it because we always have limited time and only do details at the where you need them. Okay, back to my demo scene. If you want to follow along, by the way, some of the steps I'm showing you now, there's a demo scene you can download. I think you will find the link probably somewhere in the captions of the live stream or on the Maxon website. All right, let's finally dive into Cinema 4D. So here's a quick overview of the steps that I want to show you. The first thing is about building the terrain, then blocking some elements in there, setting up shaders. We're looking at adding vegetation and details to the scene, then lighting and the sky. And last but not least, we're looking at how to create depth and atmosphere in your image. All right, so we have quite a lot to cover, so let's get going. Building the terrain. So I think we all know, every one of you knows the Cinema 4D landscape object. And I think this is easy to use and you can get some nice shapes out of it. So it's always a good starting point to kind of lay out your scene, your landscape, just to get a first impression of it. And sometimes I even use the landscape objects for mountains that are more in the background. If you want to get more realism, though, then it's good to look into height maps. You can find height maps online on many sources, and it's kind of a displacement map that gives you a realistic terrain in the end. And of course, you could build your own terrains. There are tools for that, maybe Gaia or the terrain tools in Houdini, or you can sculpt them in ZBrush. But here again, it's about saving time and doing the project on the limited time. So as I said, you find a lot of nice height maps for free even, or for just a few bucks online, and you can use them on your projects. So setting up these height maps is super simple. You just throw a displacer on a plane, actually, that we see here, and on the displacer you put in you choose the height map that you want to use. Then you have to make sure that the aspect ratio of your plane matches the resolution of your height map. After that, you just adjust your height, and then you have the height map. So, and then it's just about more subdivisions to get the details. So, and this is where it can get a bit difficult, because when you want to have more details, you need more and more subdivisions. So you can end up with a quite high poly mesh, and you need many subdivisions to get all the details of the height map that you want. But there's a solution for that, and it's the solution is using kind of a mixed approach, using the displacer and using a displacement map for the rendering. So here's the workflow that I want to show you. I have a low poly reference, like I showed you just before, with the displacer. This is kind of a low poly representation just for the viewport. And additionally, I have then another plane that can be even more low poly, as you see here. And on this plane, we just put a material with a displacement map, and we use the same map, the same height map here that we used on the displacer before. So the results in the end, they should match. So now we get kind of the best of both worlds. We have when we look at the low poly representation of the viewport, we still have a fast viewport, a snappy viewport, and we have all the details, all the displacement details in our rendering in the end. So this is what I mean. And additionally, we can use this low poly reference thing for other things like scattering trees later, for example. All right, another thing is that I always build my scenes in a real-world scale. The main reason for this is to stay consistent throughout all your assets, though you don't have to think about what scale this should be to look right. You just use the real-world scale. If you're putting in a house, you know how big a house is, and you use these values. And I think in a world of physically based lighting and shaders and camera settings and renders, it's a nice way to think about your virtual 3D world kind of as an actual film set. And you just don't have to be afraid of huge position values that you might get here. And you have to change your display view clipping, of course, in Cinema 4D, so you can see all of your scene. Otherwise, it will be clipped. So when you build your terrain, you can already think about these layers that I told you before. So think about what is your foreground, your middle ground, your background, so you already know where to put more details in the end. So next is blocking some elements, and I would start with my hero objects. So this is the objects that kind of tell the story of your image or the most important things. Here, that's just a demo scene, so I just use kind of a figure and a house. And at this point, it's a good point to check the scale of your scene. So as soon as you put in some super easy objects like this figure in the front, you immediately get a sense of the scale of the scene. And without these objects, it's hard to tell how big this all is. Then you can scatter some prominent trees in the foreground to get a feeling of the composition later. Maybe some water surfaces, so water reflections. They always bring in some nice detail, and they can help your composition. And at this point, I would adjust my camera to get kind of the final framing that I want to use in the end. So, and now it's getting really interesting. I think it's about setting up the shaders. So this is the point where our simple geometry kind of turns into a real landscape. I always love to work procedurally. To me, this is the most powerful, fast, and flexible way to do it. And I try to avoid using baked maps every time I can. So here's my major setup for the shader that I use. So it consists of a material blender and some different landscape materials. Here at this point, I only use kind of colors, simple color materials for two different grass materials, kind of a brownish soil material. We have like a gray rock material and some snow. All right, and when we combine these, we already get kind of a super believable and detailed material, as you can see here. So how's that possible? That's all the power of masking, of the procedural masks. And of course, I'm using some good old noises to blend materials, but the real power here comes from the state node. I don't know how many of you really know the state node. I think not many artists use it. And the Cinema 4D help file says, this shader allows you access to different aspects of the shading state for various shading effects, debugging, or AOV output. Yeah, so to make it easier, I want to focus on two outputs in particular here. It's the normal output that you see here. So we get maps for the normal directions. And the RGB always represents the XYZ axis, and the ray position is kind of a world position path. And again, we're getting kind of the real XYZ coordinates mapped on an RGB image here that we can use for mapping stuff later. So the B, this is the Z axis, and when we combine these, and we can create really complex maps for these different shaders. So yeah, and you can just the normal output here represents kind of the slope. You can get masks for the slope, the steep areas or the flatter areas. And here, this is kind of a map for the altitude. You can map out just the peak of the mountains, just the valley, stuff like that. It's a bit like if you know the Cinema 4D terrain shader. It's kind of the same thing that you can use here. But with the state node, you have much more different options. So right, and this like this we can pretty nice we can create pretty nice maps, masks for example for the rockier areas where we have the steep areas on the mountain at a higher altitude, for example, and we can combine these with more curvature and ambient occlusion maps, for example, to get even more detail. And here I think we see the map for the snow. It's only on the high altitude and only on these flatter areas. I know this is the rock thing, yeah. And this now should be the snow map in the end. So you can see it's kind of the snow only falls at the high altitude and where the terrain is flat enough that where the snow stays. All right, and this is what it looks in the end, and we are able to control this in a really, really quick way. So we just have to change the range mapper, kind of change the clipping, and we can have really nice control over it. And on our final image here, on the whole landscape scene, there's just this one shader. We have only one material for the whole scene. So the foreground and the mountain in the back, it's all the same shader. This is the nice thing about it. So you get a really good maybe starting point. Maybe you can even use it till the end. All right, the next step would be to change these simple color materials into real materials. So like PBR materials, and mostly I use scanned textures for it because we immediately get kind of the real thing. So again, it's about saving time. We don't have to create all these maps for ourselves. There's no shame in using the resources that are out there to get it done real quick. And of course, you can find a lot of these materials in the Cinemorph content browser. Here again, these are the exterior assets I told you before. So these are some materials you can use. And of course, there are some other sources online, like the Quixel Megascan library, for example, stuff like that. All right, the only problem we get when we're using textures is the... this is a quick overview. It's super simple. You just put in the maps that you get from these PBR materials, and you just put them in, and actually that's it. You can adjust them if you want, but you get there. You have nice shaders really quick. So now, okay, the only problem that we're getting when we're using textures like this is the tiling problem. I think we all know how ugly this can look when it's visible in our image. And especially on these large-scale scenes, when we're doing whole landscapes, that can be a problem. So usually these scanned assets, these scanned textures, are supposed to work on a kind of 2 by 2 meter area, and we have to cover a lot of ground on our landscape. So this is what I mean here. When we look at one of those shaders, one of those textures, and when we try to scale it right so that it matches kind of the how it should look in the foreground, we see that the tiling in the background gets super ugly here. The more we tile it, yeah. So a solution for that can be OSL. So it's open shader language, and there are some Redshift OSL shaders that you can find online for free. And these are kind of different tools that you can use. And here's a quick overview of them. And a few of them, they are made to randomize UVs. So especially this is what we want. So yeah, there's a few of these tools who can do this. And the one that I use here is called hex tile coordinates. So it's a super simple version. You just put it in your OSL node, and it creates this code for you. So you don't have to write any code, it's all there. And you get some sliders to adjust it, and this is working like this. You just connect the output to your UV offset, like this. And then on this tiling slider, you can adjust the scale and the tiling. And as we see in a minute here, we have the right scale that we want, but without the ugly tiling that we see everywhere. And when we combine this workflow with these procedural masks that I created earlier, we get a really nice result already. So there's no, it looks natural, it looks organic, and there's no visible tiling or anything like that. So, and except for deserts or glaciers or volcanic landscapes or something, I think almost every landscape has some vegetation on it. And often we need to find a smart way to kind of get millions of objects into the scene. So we have grass and flowers and trees, and it can get pretty massive. So you need to find a smart way to do it, to be efficient and memory saving, that the scene that it stays kind of workable till the end, and the scene is able to render in the end, stuff like that. So the go-to tool in Cinema, of course, would be the cloner, where you can scatter objects on a surface. And this is the setup, how it looks like in my scenes. I have a few different types of trees here, different sizes. I have a cloner set to object mode, and I use my mountain landscape as the source object, and then we already get trees everywhere. It's a good idea to use the multi-instance for it, just for a good performance, as well as the point viewport mode that we see here. When we change it to object, we would see the actual trees there, but the viewport will get pretty slow, as you can see here. And this is even just cones for the trees. When we use real objects in the end, you just can't navigate anymore. So it's a good way to you see where the trees are, but you only have these points as a representation. And when we render this, we already have trees everywhere, but it kind of looks like a tropical jungle mountain or something. It doesn't look like an alpine mountain because it's green everywhere. And this, we fix that in a minute. So, in the full scene, you can also see that I use a lot of polygon selections for the areas where I want to scatter the different trees or other objects. Again, to stay efficient and to only scatter objects where you would see them and not everywhere in the scene. Again, because of performance issues. So, and as you can see here, I use only instances in my cloners, though there are no real objects in that. And I have kind of a, yeah, you can see it here. Everything is just instances, and I kind of have an asset library down here with all of my objects. So every object is just in the scene just once. So we don't get multiple duplicates, anything that had to be rendered into the put into the memory of your machine. And it's to keep organized and to use less memory in the end. And again, also you can think about different LODs for your different distances, so you don't need the full detail trees that you use in the foreground for the background. You can use simpler ones for this, because otherwise your scene just would crash and wouldn't be able to render in the end. All right, so back to our jungle mountain before. When we want to control how the trees grow, we can use the power of fields. So fields are super great in Cinema 4D. And so this is how this looks in the scene. So we can control the distribution of our trees here using a vertex map, for example. And the vertex map is linked to a shader field where we have a terrain mask. I told that earlier. It does the same thing as the state node at the Redshift shader. You have masks for kind of the altitude and the slope, and here you can control where you want your trees to grow. So, and then I have this vertex map then is used in field as a field and effectors that control the visibility and the scale of the trees, and then you already get kind of a nice more convincing looking distribution of the trees. And again, it's super easy to control, super fast. You can just adjust your terrain shader. Yeah, this is the difference. And then you can just adjust your terrain shader here. And that's super quick. You can choose where you want your trees to grow, how many. So it's a super nice way to control these kind of things. All right, but in the end, of course, we don't want to use cones as trees. In the end, we want to use real objects. And again, here I tend to use lots of 3D scanned assets. Again, because you get a good-looking photoreal kind of result really quick. And yeah, like this, we can populate our scene really quick, and it's looking great. So again, the Cinema 4D content browser has a lot of these things to use for you. There's a lot of plants, different trees you can just put in. Again, you can also use other resources like the Quixel Mega Scan library or other websites, and they all always come together with textures, so you get there pretty fast, and you can populate your scene with all of the detail that you need. So, but the real beauty of these shaders and objects in the end, they only become visible when we light our scene. So usually this is what I tend to talk about the most, but actually in kind of daytime landscape scenes like this, the lighting is pretty straightforward. So usually we just have one light source, it's the sun, and maybe some diffuse ambient light coming from the sky. So I start using the RS sun and sky, and just find a nice angle for the sun where I get the mood that I want for my image. Another thing we can use is HDRIs, of course. You can find lots of these in the content browser or online, and you can play around, try different ones out. And this is a really nice way to get nice and moody results. And again, the advantage for this can be that if you're lucky, you don't only get the lighting, you also get kind of a backdrop that you can use, like a sky, or as you can see here. So this can be pretty handy. So you also could use volumetric light effects, like these atmospheric effects. You can render these in Redshift. But I think this is not super flexible, a bit hard to control, and your render time gets super slow. So I show you how I do it instead in a second, because I'm also a compositing artist. I like to do what I can in compositing just to be efficient and yeah. All right, so about depth and atmosphere. So this is what I was talking about, to get the last bit of realism to your scene and all these atmospheric effects. I could call this chapter compositing as well, because everything you see here is done in compositing. And yeah, I like to do it that way because to me this is much faster and more flexible, and I can change it all till the end and I don't have to re-render my scene. So let's talk about AOVs. I never only use beauty paths. I always render AOVs for compositing. And here I didn't use many passes, just the most important ones for my landscape scene. It's kind of here the sunlight, like an ambient light pass, sea depth pass, world position, and cryptomat to create masks. So the setup is super easy. You just go to your AOV manager, and here you can see the layers that I use, the beauty with light passes, light groups enabled. Then we have the sea depth, which is set to the full type here. We will see what that means in a second. And then I have my world position pass, also set to full. And the cryptomat just for masks, because that's always handy. And here you can see how this looks in the render view. I have the ambient light, the cryptomat pass. So in here on the setter, under the sea depth, you would expect a gradient, a grayscale gradient from black to white usually. But you only see white. And this is because I built my scene in a real world scale. And as you can see here, the values, if you check the values of the depth and the world position, you see there are values everywhere, but they are huge. So they cannot be displayed on the display, so it's only white, but the values are there. And we can use those values in compositing later. And the nice thing about that is that these values represent the real coordinates. So when I look at the sea depth, I know this is not only just a random value from 1 to 0, it's the actual distance in centimeters from the camera to the pixel that I'm looking at. So this is a really nice way to always know where you're at in your scene. And the world position pass is the same thing. The origin, you see the origin is there where these lines meet. This is kind of the scene origin, and then we have all the axes, the X, Y, Z axis mapped on different RGB channels. And now I want to show you how I use these AOVs in compositing. Usually I'm a Nuke guy and I do all my compositing stuff in Nuke, but of course, this can be done in any compositing software. In the end, it doesn't matter. And I thought maybe here are more After Effects users than Nuke users, so it's easier for you to follow along. So this is what I do. We have kind of a multi-XR image here, and we just see what passes we have in here. We have the sunlight, and the other means the ambient light that's looking like this. We can name it light ambient. Then we put in the second pass, the sun layer, sunlight, light group. And when we add these on top of each other, we get back to our beauty pass. So this is what our beauty render did look like. And what I love about light passes, it gets you much control over your grading and your look development, because you can grade the lights individually. To get really different kind of looks. So it can be great for look development, that you don't have to do it in 3D and change stuff. You can just play around it here in compositing and see what looks nice. So again, about the atmospheric effects. I think this is one of the most important things to make the landscape believable in the end. And for the atmospheric effects, I heavily rely on my depth pass, because yeah, this makes sense. And by adjusting the black and white point, as you see here, you see the super high values here that I have to use here because I rendered it in the full range. And by adjusting the black and white point and some levels, I can create masks for my depth effect. I can control pretty nice how much of it I want, where I want it to go, where it should start, and stuff like that. And additionally, as you can see here, I can mix in, this is from the world position path, the green channel that represents the y-axis, so kind of the altitude of the landscape. And I can create an additional mask for kind of a ground fog. And I can mix that together with my other mask, as you can see here, to add in some more kind of ground fog for even more realism in the end. So, and then these masks I use then for simple grading layers or color tinting, like it gets more bluish towards the back and washed out, less contrast, less saturation. And like this, we get these kind of atmospheric effects. Then again, I like to use fog layers to again add more realism, add more detail to the scene, and it doesn't only help you with your atmosphere and mood. It can also help to separate your layers, to make your composition more interesting by separating the different hills and mountains. And what I usually do here is I bring in my Cinema 4D camera and some helpers down there in the form of lights here that I put into my Cinema 4D scene to kind of put it at the position where I want my fog layers to be in the end, because the After Effects 3D space just is not usable here because of my huge values that I use in my scene, so it's just not visible here. And like this, we can just link the fog layers to my helpers right here. You see the high values here, huge values because of my real world scale. And we can just link like fog layers to that you can see now. These fog layers, you find them online. I like to use the ones from Action VFX. It's a great site for assets where you can buy stuff like that. So it's animated, so you can get some nice subtle movement in your fog. And it's always super nice to put them into your scene and play around with them. So here you see how this looks like. And of course, this is just a still. I didn't have to use it in the 3D space, but as soon as we have some camera motion in there, we need that it stays on the right spot in the image, of course. So this would work with the camera movement as well. And I use my world position path, as you see here, to create masks for these fog layers. So the foreground hills and mountains are left out, and the fog is just behind those hills. And then I have plenty of those layers in my scene, just to get some more detail. Maybe I exaggerated here a bit to make it more clear, but yeah, you see what's possible here. And it's a super fast and easy way to do, much easier than to rendering volumes in Redshift. So some ground fog here on the lake. All right, and we can use the same kind of process even for clouds in the sky. So here I created kind of the sky in Compositing, and we can see these layers are in 3D space as well. So when we have some camera movement, we can have some parallax of these layers, which is a nice thing to have. All right, so some volumetric light is pretty subtle. You see it here. It's always nice. You can use Redshift to do those kind of things with the RS environment object. Sometimes I do that because sometimes it looks better, nicer, but on most of these wide scale scenes, you can do it in comp as well. And this is a super simple thing. I have just some light burst effect, like God rays coming from the direction of the sun. Like here, you can see them here. I mask them with a soft mask, just that my image doesn't get blown out everywhere. And yeah, it just adds a nice moody effect. So last but not least, some subtle effects to get the last bit of realism. It's about some subtle glow, some... now it's running, yeah. Just about a bit of subtle glow, some grading, maybe. So we can use maybe a vignette and some lens flares. So all of these little imperfections in the end, it's like the imperfection that a real lens would produce when you film a scene like that. So this always helps to make your 3D render in the end look more believable and more like it has been filmed with a real camera. All right, so just some before and afters, because it's always nice to look at. We have the scene in the viewport. This is just the raw 3D render without compositing, and then all the atmospheric effects in the end. So it makes a huge difference to add these effects in compositing. Before, the scene looked super CG and 3D because there's no depth visible, and later we can achieve much more when we use AOVs for compositing later. So this is the other scene that you saw in the intro. And here you can see I used the HDRI in the end, and I didn't only use the sky, I also used an HDRI with a mountain landscape, and I used these mountains as well. So it's also a nice way to add more depth, more detail to your scene in a super fast way. You don't have to model these mountains. It's like a matte painting, a backdrop, which can work if you find the right HDRI for it. All right, so now just to recap, the most important things, I think, is use height maps for all the detail in your surface. Oh, sorry. Mix materials using the procedural mask. The state node is your friend here, so it's super powerful. Use 3D scan textures and assets, though there's no shame in using those. Our time is limited, so we want to get it done. So you can use all those assets that are out there. You can use OSL tools to prevent these texture tiling problems. You can use cloners and control them with fields for all the natural distribution of the plants and the trees and the landscape. When you do large-scale scenes like that, you always have to think about your detail and memory management. So the texture resolution, for example, just use as much resolution as you really need. And think about LODs, like do all the high detail objects up front and in the back. Even in the final image, the trees in the final image in the background, they were only cones. There were no tree scanned objects. I used those simple cones in the background and it works. So this can save you a lot of memory and a lot of render time. And then use AOVs, especially the Z-depth and the world position pass, to add more atmospheric effects and detail in compositing later. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Maxon, for having me. And are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Any questions for Andy? This is your moment. Where do you get your inspiration for landscapes?
My inspiration, I think I get it everywhere outside. I love to go hiking and to go out in nature and to look at all these kind of details that you see when you're standing on a mountain peak and look at the landscape. I just suck all that in. And of course, when I do every project, it's like research, look at references, online, look at a lot of photographs, and to see where the direction is, what you want to achieve. So, yeah.
I remember having a conversation with you when I was talking to you, because when I see the atmospheric effect and the landscape photos,
Yeah.
I've taken some photos of the landscape in Austria and places, and I saw them and I was like, is that a photo? And he's like, no, that's a render. And then it's just so photorealistic. It's amazing. It's
thank you.
And seeing the aspect and the effect and everything, the hard work that you put into creating those atmospheric effects is brilliant.
Nice, thank you.
Any other questions?
What are the advantages of using the world position pass instead of the Z the depth pass when you're compositing?
The difference is the depth pass always is related to your camera position. So when you have a camera move, like remember a flight through a landscape, the sea depth follows. So you get these the atmospheric effects when you use the sea depth pass would follow with it, which makes sense in a way because you get more of these effects the further away from the camera you are. And the world position pass, it's like the real 3D coordinates of every pixel, and this stays the same always. So if you want to use masks for specific areas of your image, or like I used the masks for these fog layers, you don't want these to move along with your camera when you have a camera movement. So the mountain or the hill stays at the same position all the time. So your mask should as well. So this is the difference. Sorry? For animation? Yeah. And with the world position pass, you get even more because you get all the axes. The Z path is only the Z axis. And the world position pass also gives you like an X and Y values. So the effect with the ground fog that I did in compositing is something you can only do with the world position pass.
Thank you. Any more questions? All right.
Yeah, I will be around here for some time, so just
find him. He's going to be around.
Say hi.
Find him. You can also scan the QR code that comes up on screen for a chance of winning Maxon 1 license. And we will see you in 15 minutes with amazing Ross Mason next. Thank you.